They say you never really know people until you have nothing. For 78 years, I thought I knew my family. I was Arthur Pendleton, patriarch, retired, a man who had provided a comfortable, upper-middle-class life for my wife, Helen, until cancer took her 5 years ago. Our life was one of quiet dinners, paid-off mortgages, and college funds for the grandchildren. It was sufficient. But after Helen was gone, the silence in our house became a roaring thing. I saw my life stretching out before me, a straight, predictable road to a quiet end. And a question began to gnaw at me, a question born of a lifetime of quiet observation. Did my children love me, Arthur? Or did they love the stability, the Christmas bonuses, the reliable father figure who never caused a fuss? So, I devised a test. A cruel one, perhaps, but a necessary one. I called a family meeting. My son, David, a perpetually stressed financial planner, his socialite wife, Brenda, and their teenage son, Jason. My daughter, Cynthia, a sharp-tongued corporate lawyer, her perpetually silent husband, Mark, and their daughter, Chloe, who was more interested in her phone than anyone in the room. They gathered in my living room, expecting, I think, to hear about my will, or perhaps a new health scare. "I've lost everything," I said, my voice a frail, trembling whisper I had practiced for days. The room went still. "Lost, what, Dad?" David asked, leaning forward, his planner's mind already clicking into damage control mode. "The investments," I croaked, waving a dismissive hand. "All of them. A bad tip, a leveraged fund, it's all gone. The house is mortgaged to the hilt. There's nothing left." The silence that followed was more devastating than any outburst. Brenda was the first to speak, her voice a horrified squeak. "What about Jason's college fund?" "Gone," I whispered, looking at my hands. "I'm so sorry." Cynthia stood up, her face a mask of cold fury. "How could you be so irresponsible? At your age? Do you have any idea what this means?" "It means I may have to move in with one of you," I said, laying the final, terrifying card on the table. The reaction was a symphony of silent rejection. David looked physically ill. "Dad, you know we'd love to, but the condo, it's just not built for, and my stress levels," Cynthia cut him off. "It's out of the question. My schedule is impossible. You'd be alone all day. It's not safe." They didn't offer solutions. They offered excuses. They saw me not as a father in need, but as a bankrupt, failing asset that was about to become a liability. A problem to be managed, not a person to be loved. The meeting ended with hollow promises to look into options and talk to a financial advisor. They left quickly, their goodbyes strained, their hugs non-existent. The abandonment was swift and absolute. The phone calls, once weekly, became fortnightly, then ceased altogether. Invitations to Sunday dinners dried up. When I reluctantly told them I'd been forced to sell the house and move into a modest, one-bedroom apartment in a less desirable part of town, the distance became a chasm. I was now Arthur, the poor, foolish old man. A ghost. But I wasn't poor. Not even close. Helen and I had a secret. 40 years ago, we invested every spare penny we had into a little-known tech startup run by a scruffy kid named Steve in his garage. We believed in his vision. That scruffy kid was Steve Jobs. That startup was Apple. Our initial $10,000 investment, held through every split and dip, was now worth just over $335 million. It was our insane, private joke. A fortune we never touched, hidden in a blind trust, managed by a single, discreet lawyer. We lived our comfortable life on my engineer's salary, knowing our true legacy was sleeping, growing in the digital ether. The test was my idea. Helen, sweet Helen, would have hated it. But she was gone, and I had to know. And now I did. I lived in my small, sparse apartment for a year. I bought my clothes from thrift stores. I ate simple meals. I was lonelier than I had ever been in my life, but the clarity was a cold, sharp comfort. I had my answer. The only one who didn't abandon me was my grandson, Jason. David's son. He was 16, quiet, with his grandmother's kind eyes. He'd show up at my apartment unannounced on his bike, a backpack slung over his shoulder. "Hey, Grandpa. Brought you some of Mom's leftover lasagna." She'd have thrown it out. He'd sit with me. He didn't talk about money or my failure. He talked about his classes, a girl he liked, the comic books he was drawing. He helped me set up a streaming service on my old television. He was the single, flickering candle in my year of darkness. One afternoon, he found a stack of my old technical drawings from my engineering days. He was fascinated. "You did this, Grandpa? This is amazing." "That was a long time ago, Jason. Before I lost it all." He looked at me, his young face serious. "You didn't lose it all, Grandpa. You still know how to do this. That's not something you can lose." In that moment, looking at my grandson, I saw the only person who saw me. Not my money, not my failure, but my soul. The test was over. The results were in. And it was time for the final phase of my silent revenge. The catalyst was a heart attack. Not a serious one, the doctor called it a warning shot. But it was serious enough to land me in the hospital for 2 nights. The crushing pain in my chest was a physical manifestation of the year of emotional isolation. The nurse, a kind woman with tired eyes, asked for my emergency contacts. I gave her Jason's cell phone number. He was there within 20 minutes, his face pale with fear. He held my hand while the doctors ran tests, his presence an anchor in the sterile, frightening chaos. "Did you call your parents?" I asked, my voice weak. He shook his head, a flicker of anger in his eyes. "I tried. Dad said he was in a meeting and would call back. Mom said it was probably just indigestion and not to worry." The confirmation was a fresh pain, but I expected one. It was Jason who took charge. He talked to the doctors, took notes, and made sure I understood the discharge instructions. He was the only family I had in that room. When I was released, he insisted on staying with me in my small apartment for a few days. He slept on the couch, made me tea, and ensured I took my medication. It was during this time that he found the final piece of the puzzle. I was napping in my chair when he decided to tidy up my small desk. He found a manila envelope I had carelessly left out. It wasn't the will or the trust documents, those were in a safety deposit box. This was a single, recent statement from the trust's management firm. It wasn't labeled Apple or $335 million. It was just a company name, Horizon Holdings, and a list of assets. But the numbers were unmistakable. I woke to the sound of his sharp intake of breath. He was standing by the desk, the paper trembling in his hand. He looked from the statement to me, his eyes wide with a confusion that was rapidly turning into dawning, staggering comprehension. "Grandpa," he whispered. What is this?" There was no point in lying. Not to him. "It's the truth, Jason," I said, my voice steady for the first time in a year. "This number, it's $335 million, I finished for him. Your grandmother and I invested in Apple a long time ago. We never told anyone." He sank onto the couch, the paper falling from his hand. He looked around the shabby apartment, at the thrift store lamp, the worn-out rug. Then he looked back at me, and I saw the pieces clicking together in his brilliant, young mind. "The lost fortune, the bad investments, it was all a test," he stated, "not a question." "Yes." "To see who would stay." "Yes." A range of emotions crossed his face, shock, betrayal on behalf of his family, and finally, a deep, profound sadness. "They failed, didn't they?" "Miserably," I said. "Except for you." He was quiet for a long time, just looking at me. "So, what happens now?" I smiled, a genuine, tired smile. "Now, Jason, we plan our silent revenge. And you are going to help me." I laid out my plan. It wasn't about flaunting the money. It was about exposure. It was about forcing them to confront their own greed and shallowness in the most public, humiliating way possible. The annual family reunion was in a month. It was always held at David and Brenda's country club, a gaudy display of their perceived success. They had, of course, not invited me this year. I was the embarrassing relative best forgotten. "You will ensure I am invited," I told Jason. "Tell them the doctor said getting out would be good for my spirits. Play on whatever shred of guilt they might have." Jason, now my eager and righteous co-conspirator, nodded. "They'll do it. They'll see it as a chance to show how charitable they are to their poor old dad." "Precisely," I said. "And you, my boy, will have a very important role to play." I explained the rest. The lawyer, the documents, the grand entrance. It was a theatrical production, and the stage was set. Jason made the call to his father. I listened on the extension, my heart a cold stone. "Dad? It's Jason. Look, I've been with Grandpa. The doctor says he's really depressed. Lonely. I think it would mean the world to him if he could come to the reunion." I heard David's weary sigh on the other end. "Jason, it's just not the right environment. All that noise, and you know how your mother feels about appearances." "Please, Dad," Jason pressed, his voice laced with a perfect mixture of concern and manipulation. "It might be his last one. Do it for me?" There was a long pause. I could almost hear the calculations in David's head, the minimal social cost versus the PR victory of being seen as the dutiful son. "Fine," David relented, his voice tight. "But he needs to wear a proper jacket. And tell him not to talk about his finances." I hung up the phone, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. The trap was set. The players were taking their positions. They thought they were inviting a broken old man to their party out of pity. They had no idea they were inviting the architect of their downfall. The day of the reunion dawned bright and obnoxiously cheerful. Jason helped me dress. Not in the threadbare blazer they expected, but in a suit I had specially tailored for the occasion. It was understated, crafted from a fabric so fine it felt like water. To the untrained eye, it looked simple. To anyone who knew fashion, it screamed of old, quiet money. We arrived at the country club in a hired car, a sleek, black, unassuming luxury sedan, not a limousine. The revenge would be in the details. As we walked through the manicured lawns toward the chattering crowd, I saw the looks. Pitying glances from distant cousins, strained smiles from my children. David and Cynthia descended upon us, their expressions a mixture of irritation and performative concern. "Dad, you made it," David said, giving me a stiff, one-armed hug. His eyes flickered over my suit, a flicker of confusion in them. You look well. Clean living," I said mildly. Brenda swooped in, her perfume a cloud of floral aggression. "Arthur, so good of you to come. We've put you at a quiet table in the back, near the restrooms. Less stimulation." "How thoughtful," I replied. Jason stuck by my side, a silent sentinel. I could feel the tension radiating from him. He was waiting for the cue. The event was everything I despised. Shallow conversation, boasts about promotions and vacation homes, the clinking of glasses filled with overpriced champagne. I sat at my designated, quiet, table, a museum exhibit of failure, and observed my kingdom of fools. After the main course, as coffee was being served, David stood up to make a speech. He talked about family, about legacy, about sticking together through thick and thin. The hypocrisy was so thick you could taste it. It was time. I caught Jason's eye and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. He stood up. At 16, he was tall for his age, and his voice, when he spoke, cut through the din with a surprising authority. "If I could have everyone's attention for a moment," he said. The crowd quieted, curious. David looked annoyed at the interruption. "I'd like to say a few words about my grandfather," Jason continued, his voice clear and strong. "As you know, he's had a tough year. He lost what you all thought was his fortune. And in doing so, he discovered what his true fortune really was." He paused, letting the awkward silence hang in the air. Cynthia was glaring at him, a silent command to sit down. "He found out that his true fortune wasn't money. It was the love of his family." Jason's voice dripped with sarcasm so subtle most missed it. The phone calls, the visits, the offers of a place to live, it was truly overwhelming. David's face was turning red. "Jason, that's enough." "But," Jason continued, his gaze sweeping over his parents, his aunt, the entire assembled clan, "there's been a development. A miracle, you might say. Grandpa, would you like to explain?" Every head swiveled to me. I slowly stood up, leaning on my cane for effect. "Thank you, Jason." I looked out at the sea of confused, impatient faces. My grandson is correct. I did lose a fortune. A small one. But it was a test. A test you all failed. Spectacularly. A murmur rippled through the crowd. "You see," I said, my voice growing stronger, "the fortune you thought I lost was a pittance. The real fortune, the one your mother and I built together, was always safe." I gestured to Jason. He walked to the head table and plugged a small flash drive into the laptop connected to the projector screen. A moment later, the screen behind David lit up. It showed a simple, elegant graph. The heading read, "The Pendleton Trust, Horizon Holdings." And below it, the current balance, $335,417,892.15. The gasps were audible. Brenda dropped her champagne flute. It shattered on the patio stones, the sound like a gunshot. David stared at the screen, his mouth agape. Cynthia was on her feet, her lawyer's mind trying to process the numbers, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated greed and horror. 335 million? David stammered. "Yes," I said calmly. "From an investment in Apple. Helen's and my little secret." The chaos erupted. It was a feeding frenzy of shock, of recrimination, of desperate, fawning attempts to backtrack. "Dad, we never meant," Cynthia started. "We were under so much stress." David blurted out. "Grandpa, we always loved you." Chloe chimed in, suddenly looking up from her phone. I raised my hand for silence. "This money," I said, my voice cutting through the noise, "is not for you. You demonstrated precisely what you value, and it is not me. The Pendleton Trust is hereby dissolved." I nodded to Jason. He clicked the remote. The screen changed to show a legal document. "As of 9 a.m. this morning," I announced, "the entire contents of the trust have been transferred to a new entity. The Helen and Arthur Pendleton Foundation, dedicated to funding STEM education for underprivileged children." I looked directly at my children. The only direct beneficiary, named as the foundation's chairman with a modest stipend for his work, is my grandson, Jason. The one person who saw a man, not a bank account. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a billion dreams of luxury cars and beach houses evaporating into thin air. It was the sound of my silent revenge reaching its devastating, satisfying conclusion. I had taken their greed, their neglect, and their hypocrisy, and I had used it to fund a legacy of hope. And I had given the keys to the only one who deserved them. I turned and walked away, Jason at my side, leaving them in the ruins of their own making. The fallout was as nuclear as I had anticipated. The weeks that followed were a torrent of angry phone calls, pleading letters, and even a visit from a chastened David and Cynthia, who tried to argue that I was not of sound mind. My lawyer, the formidable Ms. Agatha Price, handled them with the efficiency of a sniper. The documents were ironclad. The money was gone from my control, forever dedicated to the foundation. Their true colors, now fully exposed, turned from pleading to venom. They called me a cruel, manipulative old man. They accused Jason of poisoning my mind. They were ghosts screaming into a void, their words having no power over me anymore. The revenge was complete, but as the initial thrill faded, I was left with the quiet aftermath. I had proven my point. I had shattered my family. But what had I built in its place? The answer was Jason. With the guidance of Ms. Price and a board of directors we appointed, Jason threw himself into the work of the foundation. He wasn't just a figurehead. He had his grandmother's heart and a sharp, intuitive mind. He helped design grant applications, visited community centers, and spoke with a passion that belied his years. The modest stipend allowed him to focus on the foundation and his education without the corrupting influence of extreme wealth. We moved out of the small apartment. I bought a comfortable, but not ostentatious, home with a garden where I could putter about. Jason had his own space there, but he was often at his own place near the university, where he was studying nonprofit management. One evening, he came over for dinner. We were sitting on the patio, watching the sunset, a comfortable silence between us. "Do you ever regret it, Grandpa?" he asked softly. "Cutting them off completely?" I thought about it, watching the colors bleed from the sky. "I regret that it was necessary," I said. "I don't regret the action. They made their choices. I simply ensured they had to live with the consequences." "They're miserable," Jason said. "Mom and Dad fight constantly. Aunt Cynthia's firm found out about the situation, and she was passed over for partner. It's all fallen apart for them." I felt a pang of something, not regret, but a profound sadness for the family that could have been. Money doesn't ruin people, Jason. It reveals them. The foundation was just the mirror. He nodded, understanding. "The foundation just approved the first 10 grants," he said, a smile finally touching his lips. "We're funding a robotics lab at an inner-city high school. One of the kids we're helping, she reminds me of you. She takes old radios apart and puts them back together, just to see how they work." In that moment, any lingering doubt vanished. This was the true legacy. Not the silent revenge, but the silent redemption. The money wasn't being used to punish anymore, it was being used to create. To inspire. To give a young girl with a mind for engineering the chances I had, without the burden of a faithless family. A few months later, I received a letter. It was from David. It wasn't a demand for money. It was an apology. A real one. He wrote about the soul-searching he'd been forced to do, about the hollow man he'd become, chasing a version of success that meant nothing. He didn't ask for anything. He just said he was sorry. I didn't reply. The forgiveness wasn't mine to give, it was his to earn from himself. But I placed the letter in a drawer, a small, fragile seed of something that might, one day, grow into a new kind of relationship. A poorer, but perhaps more honest, one. Today, my life is full. I have my garden. I have my books. I have monthly meetings with the foundation board, where I get to watch my grandson blossom into a leader of integrity and compassion. The silence in my house is no longer a roar of loneliness, but a peaceful hum of contentment. Everyone abandoned me when I acted poor. They saw a liability, a failure, a man with nothing left to give. They were wrong. I had everything to give. I just chose to give it to the future, and to the one person who saw the man behind the fortune, even when he thought there was no fortune left. The silent revenge was not in becoming rich again. It was in using that wealth to build a monument to the very values my family had abandoned: loyalty, kindness, and unconditional love. And in the end, that was a victory more satisfying than any number on a bank statement. The greatest revenge is not wealth, but peace. Not in making them regret losing your money, but in proving you never needed their approval to begin with. True legacy isn't measured in millions, but in the lives you change and the love you honor. This has been Silent Revenge.